The following interview was conducted as part of the Price of Freedom project by the Madison County Military Heritage Commission to inform and enlighten young people and the community as a whole about the sacrifices made by those in the military on battlefields around the world. We wish to thank the Huntsville School System and the Lehigh Broadcast Center for their help in presenting this military heritage program. Hello, I'm Tom Kennemer. Welcome to our program. Today our guest is Christopher Johnson. Chris is a lieutenant colonel in the Alabama Army National Guard and was awarded the Army Commendation Medal with Valor for his heroic actions while serving in Afghanistan in 2006. Chris Johnson was inducted into the Madison County Military Heritage Hall of Heroes in 2014. Chris, thank you very much for being with us, sir. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Before we get into questions regarding your military service, tell us a little about yourself. Are you originally from this area?
I was born in Wisconsin. I moved here when I was 10 years old, so I guess you could say I'm one of the original Huntsville people.
So you finished up school and everything here in
Huntsville High School.
I see. What about your family? I believe you have a brother who served in the military. Is that correct?
My older brother Steve. He was a retired Air Force E7. Served in Turkey and Saudi Arabia.
And he's a Valor Award winner, recipient as well.
Right. It's an Airman's Medal for Valor and a Purple Heart.
I see. Now, as you mentioned, you attended school here in Huntsville. Did you have any interest in the military while growing up? Were you involved with the ROTC or anything like that?
Strangely, it didn't occur to me at all. I never really gave any thought to the military at all when I was in high school.
Is that right?
We had the Naval ROTC, so it really didn't interest me. And none of my family had been in the military at the time, so.
I see. You went on to get a degree at the University of Alabama. What is your degree in?
A business degree in industrial management.
I see. Now, did you go right to work out of college and then join the Guard? Or talk about your decision about going into the Army National Guard. What led up to that?
My freshman year at Alabama was a little tough on my grades, so I joined the National Guard. A friend of mine had been in for a year, so I went and joined the National Guard into his unit. It looked kind of interesting. He said he had a lot of fun, and frankly, I needed a little bit of discipline to get through school. So I joined right after my freshman year of college.
And got involved with the officers training program, right? Yeah.
No, I'm actually an officer candidate school graduate.
Oh, I see. Okay.
So yeah. I did not do the ROTC. I went to officer candidate school for the Alabama National Guard.
I see. Okay. What was officer training like? Describe that for us, Chris.
It was intense.
Right. And where was that at?
It was at Fort McClellan, Alabama.
I see. Okay. Yeah.
So it's very intense. Their intent is to put a lot of stress on you, and then see how you perform. See how you might perform under combat conditions.
How long was it? It was like 2 or 3 months, or a couple of months. What length
you're
of
doing
time?
it National Guard style, so you do 2 weeks in the summer, then you go to their training on the weekends for a year, and then do 2 more weeks in the summer at Fort Bragg.
I see. Chris, explain to our students how things work when you join the National Guard. You get to keep your day job, so to speak, but you're always on call for state or national emergencies, right?
Right, and when you're in the National Guard, I mean, you're really part of the community, part of protecting your community. So, I've always had a day job, always had a civilian job, so to speak, and but when crises come up, Hurricane Ivan, Hurricane Katrina, we're always available on short notice to get up from that job and go protect the citizens of Alabama.
I see. Now, your civilian job is on Redstone Arsenal. What is it you do out there?
I'm a logistics management specialist, so I use my military experience to kind of tie into the civilian side. So I work for the Department of the Army.
It all coincides.
Right.
Works, yeah. Now, how long have you been doing that?
I've been doing that for about 10 years.
And then talk about your job in the Guard at the present time. What do you do?
Currently, I'm the commander of the 1169th Contracting Battalion. It's an Alabama National Guard unit here in Huntsville. And our job is to provide contracting support to units deployed for contingency operations.
I see. And where are you at, like Fort Raymond Jones, or where are you? Where's your office?
Jackson Balch on Johnson Road.
Oh, okay. Okay. Yeah. All right. What kind of training did the Army provide to you in preparation for your duties in the Guard?
I've been to quite a few schools. I went through combat engineer school, my NCO leadership training, officer candidate school, where we learn, everything's focused on, combat infantry. I was branched armor, so I went through the armor basic and advanced course up at Fort Knox. So I've done a lot of time there. multiple staff schools, and quite a few, training exercises, Joint Readiness Training Center rotations, National Training Center rotations out at Fort Irwin. So quite a bit over the years as I worked up to my first combat deployment.
Army National Guard believes in training its personnel, doesn't it? Yeah,
well, they do. We meet the same standards as the regular Army does.
Right, right. Before we talk about your tour in Afghanistan, tell us a little about some of your other duties in the Guard. You mentioned earlier, Hurricane Katrina. Now, your duties, you were deployed, I think, to Mississippi at that time. Is that correct?
Correct. I was a company commander, and during Hurricane Katrina, we were originally stationed in Mobile. When Mobile didn't get hit too bad, the governors talked, and our force went over the border into Mississippi, around the Ocean Springs, Pascagoula area. I ended up being the commander of the relief force for Pascagoula, Mississippi for the first 2 weeks after Hurricane Katrina.
So Mississippi Guard and Alabama Guard working together, or to a certain extent?
To a certain extent.
Yeah,
The Mississippi Guard was in charge. We had a task force. It was straight Alabama National Guard. They gave us a certain area in eastern Mississippi.
What all did you have to do, Chris? I mean, what, to help clean up, or what did you do?
We started off with the search and rescue piece, because we were actually the first ones in. The sheriff's deputies hadn't even gotten through there yet.
I see.
So as we were driving down to Mobile, the storm was coming north, so we went through the storm going south. We did search and rescue and reconnaissance for the first couple of days, just to get a gauge of the extent of the damage and get medical help and evacuation to residents that were still there. And then that shifted, and we started supporting the food distribution, water distribution, and escorting other rescue workers and utilities workers. So we provided their security while they're in the affected area.
The damage from that storm was really eye-opening, I imagine. You saw it firsthand. It was something to see, I would imagine.
It was amazing, the power.
Yeah. You also served in Iraq. Talk about that, your deployment in Iraq.
Well, I was stationed here at Redstone Arsenal working for Army Material Command as a mobilized National Guard soldier. And I was asked, hey, Chris, you want to go to Iraq? And I'd been home from Afghanistan about 18 months. I said, well, no, thank you.
Yeah.
They said, okay. Called me back 10 minutes later, said, okay, here's when you leave.
Right.
So I worked for Army Material Command in Iraq at Joint Base Balad, which is Base Anaconda, is the main logistics base for North Iraq. So I worked as the chief of operations for a brigade up there providing logistics support. That was my first real introduction to the logistics side after being a combat arms officer for years.
Yeah. Now, were you involved in combat in that country at that time?
Somewhat. We received a lot of indirect fire. I mean, we did movements, movements from one base to another, mostly flying, occasional convoys, but not direct combat. I didn't have a direct combat role.
I see. Describe to our students what Iraq was like, the terrain, the climate.
It really varied. You get down to southern Iraq around Basra, you've got a lot of flat desert, a lot of open areas, not much vegetation. You get up north toward the Euphrates River, and between the Tigris and the Euphrates, really. I mean, it's a very lush area, a lot of farmland, a lot of palm trees. There's a lot of swamps there, which you wouldn't necessarily think. Yeah. And then up in the northern part of the country, you've got some more rolling hills and grasslands. It's still quite arid, but it's very green, very, it can be lush in the spring. So it really varies a lot.
In its own way, it can be very beautiful.
It can be a beautiful place.
Yeah. Talk about being away from home while you were serving our country. How did that affect your family?
Well, it was very stressful on them. We had kind of broken into it because I was mobilized for Operation Noble Eagle, 2002 to 2004, doing the Homeland Defense. So I was actually stationed at Anniston Army Depot. So I was gone, but I could come home every other weekend or so. So we kind of eased into it. So by the time I went to Afghanistan in '06, they were somewhat used to it. So it was really tough on them. Both my daughters were pretty young. It was a combat mission, so they were really concerned. But they turned off the news, didn't watch the news, and just waited for me to call home.
Chris, I think you mentioned that you had joined the Guard, was it 95, around that time, middle 90s?
I was commissioned in 1995. I joined the Guard in 1989.
Yeah. Now, I'm sure you formed lasting friendships in the service. Do you still stay in contact with a lot of people that you've served with?
I do. I've got some of my friends from Afghanistan that I served with. Strangely enough, some of the people that I served with in Iraq now work here in Huntsville. They just made it here, retired, and now they're civilians here.
Yeah. Good.
So, and Facebook's a great thing for that too.
Good, yeah. It's good to keep up with the friendships.
It is.
Yeah, it sure is. Now, when you had some free time, however little that was, when you were serving overseas, what did you do for relaxation?
Well, experiences vary. In Afghanistan, obviously, there was not a whole lot of free time. We were at very austere bases. So it was mostly sleep, clean weapons. We'd read a book, watch a movie every now and then on a little DVD player, but that was just the couple hours of spare time that you have here and there. A lot of it was working for your next mission. Get to Iraq, it was a more established base, so spent more time at the gym. They had more activities going on. And then my last deployment to Kuwait, obviously it was, I wouldn't even call it a combat deployment. It was almost a year and a half in Kuwait. Spend time at the gym, going downtown to Kuwait City, meeting the locals, eating out at restaurants. So
a lot of difference, yeah.
So experiences vary.
Yeah. In Afghanistan, did you have barracks, or you slept in tents, or out in the open, or how did?
Again, we had a base that we worked out of originally. It was an Afghan army base, and the Americans had a small contingent on that base. So we lived in old Russian barracks.
Really? Yeah.
And I call that the place to keep my stuff, because we went out east afterwards, and some places we had barracks, some places we built what's called little bee huts, just small wooden huts, and throw some cots down.
Yeah.
Temporary buildings. We lived in tents for a while.
Yeah.
I've slept in a Humvee numerous nights.
Wow. Yeah.
So it was
not the most comfortable thing in the world.
In Iraq during that time, they were living good, and we were not living so good.
I see. Now, you had cell phones. Were you able to talk with your family back home often?
I could call them pretty often. We would get prepaid cell phones on the local network. So that's one thing Afghanistan was pretty good with, was they're getting a cell phone network. So I could call home.
Yeah. What company or outfit, you may have mentioned it briefly, but what company or outfit were you attached to while you were in Afghanistan?
I was attached to Task Force Phoenix, is the 41st Infantry Brigade. That's who we were originally attached to. And then as embedded trainers, we were farmed out to the other combat units. So I served a good bit of time with 3rd Battalion, 10th Mountain Division. And then we switched over and served with 3rd Battalion, 3rd Special Forces Group.
Explain a little more for the students, Chris, embedded. Talk about what that means and what you do.
Okay, as an embedded trainer, I was the senior advisor to a Afghan infantry battalion. So I was an advisor and a mentor for the battalion commander and his senior staff. I had 15 other people with me for a 16-person team, and we advised them at each company. Usually had a captain and a non-commissioned officer at each company serving as an advisor to the company commander. So we provided that expertise in how to fight, how to sustain yourself in the field, some of the lessons learned from the Army. So we would work with them through their training cycle, we would work with them through planning for missions, and we would actually go out with them on operations and actually fight alongside them.
Were you in different parts of Afghanistan, or one just general area?
Somewhat of a general area. I was in what was called RC East, is the eastern area from Jalalabad to Asadabad, up to Nuristan province.
I see.
And then we did some time in Kapisa province, which is just east of Bagram. It was a pretty hot area.
Describe Afghanistan for us. You talked about Iraq. Describe Afghanistan.
Again, it varies. It's the Afghans like to say that Afghanistan is where God dumped everything left over. You'll see it's a lot of rocks, a lot of rock formations, so it looks like it's a big pile of rocks. But you get around the rivers, and it's very lush. There's terraced farms all over the place. A thriving economy. I was talking to somebody the other day, and we were discussing about the place in Afghanistan where we were, and it was the same place. And we're both amazed this, 10 years down the road that these people could make water run uphill. They could irrigate farms, and it was amazing. And they would dig it by hand and build irrigation systems that would actually run uphill from the river.
Wow, the ingenuity was there.
It was amazing.
Wow.
So, and beautiful people.
Right.
I mean, if you're from the South especially, you'll understand Afghanistan, because they're great people. 99% of them want their family to have, their kids to have something better than they had, want to be left alone,
Right.
and just want to go about their business. And they're hospitable, they're friendly. I made a lot of friends there.
Good, good. How long was your tour there?
It was a year.
Okay. Chris, as we mentioned earlier, you received the Army Commendation Medal with Valor for your actions during combat in Afghanistan. Describe for us what happened on that day in November of 2006. And you were a captain at that time,
Correct.
I believe, right?
Correct.
Describe that for us.
Well, our mission, we were in Kapisa province. Our mission was to move down from the north to the south down the Tagab River and clear the Tagab River Valley. It was one mountain range away from the capital, Kabul. So a lot of insurgents were getting across the mountains, staging in that area, getting across the mountains and starting to set off car bombs and other IEDs actually in the city of Kabul, committing attacks from there.
Okay.
So 3rd Special Forces Group was tasked to clear the Tagab Valley. We were already there as embedded trainers. We had already received, the Afghans had already received the mission. So we were already there. We met up with the Special Forces Group there, worked through some planning, and then conducted a major operation coming from the north and the south down through the Tagab Valley. It's called Operation Al Hassan. Once we started going down there, we were taking sporadic fire for about the first day or so. All the villages were cleared out and boarded up. Everything was quiet. So it became less of a counterinsurgency, more of a straight up fight. We ended up finding out we were actually outnumbered in that fight. So as we moved down the valley, we started taking rockets and RPGs from across the river. So our team, we had to command a battalion of Afghans with their commander. So our team was spread out across both sides of the river, through the pomegranate orchards, searching houses, clearing areas, finding weapons caches. And we ended up doing that, called movement to contact. It was about a 3-day fight straight down the valley before we got to the village of Tagab.
And you were in the orchard, and they opened fire. Is when you were awarded this, you're recipient of the Commendation Medal with Valor. It was on that day in that orchard when they opened fire on you, is that right?
Right, they would fire from the orchards because
see.
it was really difficult for us to hit them in there. A lot of small pomegranate trees through there, and a lot of walls to hide behind. Again, back to their stacking rock ability. So there's lots of walls through there. So we would take fire, and what we had to do is, my job was to really control the movement of my unit.
I see.
Radios would go down, we'd lose communications. One company would get stuck in an area for a while. So a lot of my job actually ended up being getting out of my vehicle and moving from place to place, from unit to unit. And
had to expose yourself to do that, right?
Right.
Right. And how long did that firefight last? Was it like all day or a few hours or what?
Off and on for about 3 days.
Oh, you mentioned,
So,
okay.
Yeah, it was pretty much a running fight.
Just in that general area there. Yeah.
Right, it was about 15 kilometers down the river as we moved through.
Did you lose any people during that battle?
We had a couple wounded.
I see.
We didn't actually lose anybody.
Chris, share with us what or who prepared you to take the actions you did in combat.
20 years of training, being a combat arms officer. I've had a lot of really good mentors along the way. When I was a lieutenant, I had a couple of great company commanders. Mike Mitchell was my troop commander at the time, who was really a mentor to me, and I really learned a lot from him. So, and
The old sergeants may have helped a lot too along the way.
Lance Woodfin, my first platoon sergeant, kept me straight. I actually ended up going to Afghanistan with Mike Mitchell years later. So he was actually my boss in Afghanistan too.
I see.
So he kept me straight.
Good.
And my team sergeant, Sergio, old crotchety infantry guy from California, the California National Guard, who he kept me grounded and kept me focused on what I was supposed to be doing.
All of you working together.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. Fantastic. All right, how would you describe to young people what it's like to serve in a war zone, the thoughts you have of possibly being killed or wounded during the battle?
I thought a lot about that question, and serving in a combat zone is boring, very boring, punctuated by the occasional frightening, terrifying couple minutes.
So a lot of lulls. But
there's a lot of lulls, but it makes up for it in those little bursts of excitement.
I see, yeah. I know people often wonder, is it okay to be afraid or scared during combat? How would you answer that?
If I had somebody who wasn't afraid in combat, then I would not be near them, because something's not right.
Yeah.
Everybody's scared.
Mm-hmm. But it's not always on your mind that you're going to be wounded or killed. I mean, you're so busy, you know, when the action is going,
right.
you know, that you're trying to do your job, and so to speak.
Yeah, you tend to forget about it.
Yeah.
So there's a balance where you can forget about it and focus on your job, but then you can swing too far and become complacent. And that was usually our fear, because of getting too complacent.
Yeah.
My team sergeant, I remember one time I was standing behind a Humvee. We were taking fire from up on top of a hill. And I was talking on the radio, trying to bring close air support in. And the first thing I feel is something grabbed the back of my neck and pulled me down. And it was my team sergeant. And he pointed up. And bullets were skipping off the top of the Humvee right over my head. So you get complacent.
Right.
So you're scared, you deal with it,
Yeah.
but then you've got to remind yourself to be scared sometimes.
When you come through a battle like that, I imagine there's a certain amount of maturity that stays with you the rest of your life, I guess. Don't you think so?
I don't get worked up about much.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Chris, you've served in a war zone, and I'm sure that you've seen a lot of, or a few war movies anyway. Do you think war is depicted accurately in most of the movies and TV shows that are seen now?
Again, they do skip all the boring parts, but that would be pretty boring
Yeah,
TV.
keep the action moving.
Yeah, 6 hours of watching somebody watch movies on the internet.
Yeah.
It would not be an exciting movie. But some do, some don't.
Yeah.
Some movies really take care to do it. Like even like American Sniper did a pretty good job, but it was even dramatized a good bit. So the medium doesn't necessarily translate too well to film. War to film.
I see.
Because there's a lot you can't really capture.
Right. Yeah. Do you often wonder, would you do it all over again?
I like to think so.
That's important to you, isn't it? Yeah, yeah. Thus far, what is your favorite memory from serving in the military in various countries around the world? What stands out?
Well, we had an interesting time when we were training the Afghans. We were out on the rifle range, and they would refuse to use the sights on their weapons. They would point and shoot. So we're trying to train them in marksmanship so they can shoot effectively. And part of the religion, it's a total faith. So their faith is, Allah will guide my bullets. So and that was fairly common. So my instructors and I, scratched our heads for a while to figure this out. And one of my teammates and we sat down with their commander and said, okay, Allah will guide your bullets. Did Allah create you? Yes. Did Allah create your eyes? Yes. Did Allah create your brain and your hands? Yes. Did Allah give somebody the wisdom to put sights on that weapon? Yes. So that's how Allah is guiding your bullets. And it clicked. And we understood each other. So, that cultural understanding that we started to develop between the two of us, I mean, vastly different cultures. Poor, barely literate, private in the Afghan army, devout Muslim, and then, Christian boy from Alabama, and, another Christian guy from California. First generation Mexican American. We all sat down and we all understood each other.
Came to a common understanding.
Right.
Right, yeah.
And became brothers at that moment.
Right, yeah. Tell us a little about your family. I know you and your wife, Christy, have 2 daughters that you're very proud of.
Oh, yeah. My oldest, Joy, is a freshman at Troy this year. She's an amazing kid. She's the most level-headed person I know, way past me.
Yeah. Do you think she'll be involved with the military at some point?
It's hard to tell.
Yeah.
And I hope she doesn't see this, because I want to encourage her, but I don't.
I see.
She's interested in it, but she doesn't necessarily want to commit to it.
Yeah. And she was involved with the ROTC at Huntsville High.
She was ROTC at Huntsville High.
Yeah.
She was the detachment commander there. She actually works in her volunteer job for a scholarship at Troy, works for the Army ROTC department.
Yeah.
But she's not involved in the ROTC.
We're going to date this interview. This is on February 10th, 2016. So your daughters and their children are looking at this video years later, so we'll know the date and the period that we're talking about.
Right.
Yeah. Chris, you stepped up and served our country in combat as many others have through the years. Do you think the young people of today will be up to that task if they're called upon sometime in the future?
I think they will. There's no doubt in my mind that there are good kids coming in now. I see some of the new people coming in the service now that are great kids. My father's generation thought we were worthless and lazy, and we've done okay.
Yeah.
They will be fine. Our country needs to make sure that we remember the ideals that we're founded on, and so we know there's something worth fighting for.
Right. What would you like for young people, especially our students, to learn and hopefully remember from your combat and your military experience?
There's always something bigger than yourself to believe in. And whether it's the person sitting next to you, whether it's your country, or just your family. There's always something, and that's universal, worldwide. Remember, people that you're fighting, also believe in something. They believe in their families. They support their tribe. Sometimes things are worth fighting for.
Lieutenant Colonel Chris Johnson, thank you, sir, for participating in our Price of Freedom interview series and allowing us to preserve your military experience for the people of this community. And thank you, sir, for your service to our country.
No, thank you for having me.
If you'd like more information regarding this interview or any interview in our Military Heritage series, please contact the Madison County Military Heritage Commission website at mcmhc.org.